Live from Kakariko Village. Broadcast throughout the Retroverse, transmitted to the real world via a maze of wires connecting a Super Nintendo to a Wii, to a Wi-Fi network, and finally to the Internet. The Techno Funk Boy presents the Retro Zoo Super Show. Now here are your hosts, Kai and Steven.
Well, where did he leave?
Affirmative.
Where did? Oh my goodness.
Kai, we are live on the air.
What? I know, but I really wasn't expecting to do this part without Steven.
Seeing as this is a live show, I do not think you have a choice.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to the Retro Zoo Super Show. So this is awkward because I had this whole thing planned that was going to be a little back and forth, and I probably should have let off with that when I was talking to Steven. But instead, I mentioned that a good chunk of the show was going to be dedicated to an interview that had been previously recorded.
You said the vast majority of the show.
Well, okay, I did say that. So more than half of the show is dedicated to an interview. And I told Steven that this was going to be the case, and I was like working my way into, but I got this great like thing that we're gonna do, right here in the beginning of the show, and a discussion for after the airing of the interview, and I didn't get that far. He said that he had something else that he would do.
In fact, he said, well, screw this, I'm going shopping.
Okay, he did say that. So I guess this might end up being a kind of a shorter episode. But to preface, we do have an interview, and this turned out to be a really good interview that we will launch into here momentarily. As way of a preface to it, I am part of a Facebook group. It's kind of a small community called the Backlog Book Club, and the main point of it, and we're going to get into the details on it, is to encourage one another to kind of get through the backlog that we have of video games. Well, not necessarily not buying new games, but to consider our backlog in the process, and we will get into the interview here just momentarily. In the meantime, Drum, is there any news?
Affirmative.
Oh, good. What is the news?
Steven had prepared it.
So we don't have it, do we?
Negative.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to jump right into this then. We are talking with Nate McKeever, who is kind of a Facebook friend of mine. We haven't met formally, but we've had some good talks. Y'all know how that goes. He is the one who kind of pushed and started that particular group, and kind of consideration amongst a larger group of us that were in the Reform Gamers Facebook group and their podcast. So we're going to jump right into that. I will interrupt a couple of times because there are a couple of times where Nate and I start talking inside baseball, and I did not take a moment to explain what I meant. And so you're going to hear me like jump in and talk about something. So we will be interrupting the interview with our break and then come right back into it. But I really hope y'all enjoyed this. This was a really fun talk we had, and I think that it's. I'll go more into this when during the interview, but I am very, very aware that just, listening to gaming podcasts, will oftentimes cause to swell up within us a desire, a covetousness, a longing to get games that are being mentioned or being talked about or other people are enjoying. And I run across this a lot. I do watch Twitch quite a bit. I see what people are playing, and I think I'd like to play that too. I listened to retro podcasts, and I was like, oh, I haven't run across that game. I would like that one too. And so I'm very aware that people might be coming to this podcast with that same desire being fanned within them. That flame is rising up as we talk about really cool games. But so I really did want to do this interview as kind of a balance to that, and so that we don't make the mistake of just buying everything that our heart desires when it desires it. So let's jump right into this. This turned out really good, so I'm anxious for you to hear it. All right. Well, I am on the line with Nate McKeever. Thank you so much for joining us. And on a very, when I first came across what this became, I thought it was a really interesting and weird topic, but very much almost a needed one, because I had a lot of games that I hadn't played, and I kept wanting to buy more. And what ended up happening is you and several other people started encouraging people to actually play the games that they had. So first of all, again, thank you for joining us. And you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Nate, and I am post mailman. I don't know. I'm a mailman with the United States Postal Service, and married to Megan, my wife. Obviously she's my wife, married. Yeah, but there's some implications there. I have a couple of dogs, and I have a keen interest in the topic of stewardship. And not just in regards to how we use like our physical resources, but in regards to how we use, some of the, non-physical resources like our time, our energy, our, thought space. And, being a fairly avid gamer, I noticed myself falling into this trend of buying games because they go on sale and then not doing anything with them. They'd sort of, maybe get 10, 15 minutes of attention, and then, and then they'd go into a literal or digital pile of shame or backlog or whatever you want to call it. And, you know, I was in TRG, and actually what sort of triggered this was that Logan from the Reformed Gamers had mentioned the Everyday Gamers podcast at one point in time, and it was they actually. One second, I gotta put my dog out. I know I'm breaking the flow here or whatever.
No, that's
really
fine.
Sorry.
And just for context, because I think we actually have a big overlap of audience with the Reformed Gamers, but just setting the context, and this is actually where I first kind of Facebook met you. Is in the Reformed Gamers group. So for those listening who don't know, Reform Gamers is a podcast and a Facebook group that's made up of Christian video gamers, and so topics like stewardship of money and time come up a lot, and are actually have very, very helpful conversations, you know, about how we use our money and our time and that sort of thing in that group. And so it's actually a really cool group and a really, really cool podcast that kind of approach things a little bit differently than I mean honestly, and even the way we would here at the Retro Zoo, but definitely not in a bad way at all, but in a very, very good way. And so that was kind of the context of the conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, I think too, it's one of those things where you know, I think we need to just sort of like, you know, wear our allegiances on our sleeves, and it's like I think you're PCA as well, right?
Yeah, same. Okay, we're going to pause right here because we are throwing around acronyms like PCA without even trying to explain what we're talking about. So PCA is the Presbyterian Church in America. It is a Presbyterian denomination, and it is the denomination to which I belong.
Kai, how is there a PCA church in Hyrule when Hyrule is not in America?
Well, but no, it is, because the Super Nintendo that we live in is in America.
I don't think it works that way.
Well, okay, but, you know, according to the bylaws and other stuff I don't understand about the PCA church, that is the consideration when they, send out church planting and missionaries. They would go by the location of the Super Nintendo, and that is connecting us to the internet.
This still does not seem right.
Okay, I'm really not in charge. I'm really not in charge of that at all. And so, I don't know. Yeah. It's just really something we're going to have to live with.
I'm just saying it bothers me.
I'm getting that impression, Drum. That's really, I mean, there's literally nothing I can do about this. I don't know. Let's just go back to the interview.
Okay, so it's like, you know, it's predominantly Reformed, whether that's Presbyterian. There's some Lutherans who would consider themselves Reformed, some Anglicans, I think, who would, you know, try to claim that, you know, whether or not
right.
we could, but there's some Reformed Baptists in there, and it's just been it's probably one of my favorite communities on the Facebook, in the Facebook universe or whatever, you know, sort of however you want to build that, whatever Facebook, the monstrosity that Facebook is.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it was sort of born out of some of those conversations. And I had listened to an Everyday Gamers podcast episode where they actually did a backlog draft, which is pretty much the exact same thing we do with the backlog beatdown, where it's you you get a group of guys together. They submit the quick and dirty rules on this is they submit a list of games from their pile of shames or backlogs or whatever you want to call it. I refer to it as the pile of shame because it's
I really like that. That's great.
Yeah, that's kind of what it was at one point. Like physically, it was just this pile of games that just sat and collected dust, and you look and be like, I should really get around to that, but I'm not going to. So there was a group of us who I sort of threw it out into the Facebook group. I had reached out to Logan and said, hey, are you cool with me doing this? And he was like, yeah. And so I threw it out there into the TRG Facebook group and had, I think the first time had probably like a dozen guys, maybe 15. And we didn't have a whole lot of rules the first time. I think it was just sort of, you would submit, 10 to 20 games from your piles of shame. And then everybody else in the group would sort of pick through your list, pick out a game for you. And then, really some of the only rules we did have were that, if somebody, like if two different guys picked a game, it kind of locked the game in for you.
Right. Yeah.
So you had to play that. So it's like, if Chrono Trigger was on somebody's list, which everybody should have played that by now. But, that's.
Amen. Preach.
It is the pinnacle of Square before, it became the, I was going to use the words Whore of Babylon, but,
yeah.
I know that's a little hyperbolic.
But yeah, it was definitely the pinnacle of Square at Square's pinnacle. And it was like the tip top of their just incredible SNES years where they were just hitting home runs just nearly every game. At least every game that we got in America. I mean, I'm sure they did more in Japan, but no, yeah, I'm totally with you on that. That game's amazing.
So yeah, it's probably like in my top 3. Like it's just one of my favorite games of all time. But, so, just going back to that, if 2 guys, you have Chrono Trigger on the list, 2 guys say, hey, you need to play this, you have to play it. Now, the one thing we didn't sort of set in stone was, and we've sort of refined the rules because we've done 3 or 4 of these things at this point, and they've all been sort of smaller, less, publicized or, not right. So high profile. But, it was, we've sort of refined it. It's like, okay, like, you don't necessarily need to beat the game.
Sure.
And, if there comes a point, because there are just some like, sometimes you buy a game off the hype, you play it for 15 minutes or 20 minutes or an hour or whatever, and you sort of get into it and then you move on. And when you come back to it, it's like sometimes you realize that it's not quite, it's kind of it's not quite as polished or as nice or just whatever you were into, if you were even into it. You're like, this game isn't as it's not grabbing me as much as it should have.
Sure.
Or that I thought it would. And so, it's the idea is like commit to playing enough of it to know whether or not you're going to finish it. You're going to sort of be able to walk away from it in good conscience. Just
right.
Sort of say like, don't just sort of like, it's, I used to call it the solid 60, which is like, give it a solid hour, and then make an evaluation off of that. But it's like, also, there are just some games that aren't fun. They aren't good and they aren't worth playing. And not every game is for every person. So it's just.
Right, exactly.
Sometimes, like you have that dude who's got Chrono Trigger on his list and he's just a freak. And, he's like, I played it for a couple hours and I hate it. And I just, I pray for him, hoping that, he'll repent and,
right.
But, it's really just sort of an attempt to sort of be a little wiser with the resources that we have and to just demonstrate, sort of like, yeah, just sort of embracing that stewardship mentality when it comes to our hobbies.
Yeah.
Because, part of that is too, it's sort of a reaction because there is so much pushback when you look at like guys like John Piper and, recently Todd Friel from Wretched Radio came out and they sort of smacked and they say like, why are grown men playing video games? Da 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 da. And I think instead of the knee-jerk reaction where it's like, well, video games aren't the problem. You just suck and you're an idiot and you don't understand. I think the solution, part of the solution to that, and I think there are things that enthusiasts and fans of the genre, the different genres within games, especially in the Christian camps, there are things that we should hear and learn from those men who are our brothers and we love. But I think, there's also wisdom in being able to say, well, okay, like there's merit to some of these arguments, but there is more going on here than this. And I think one of the ways that we can sort of demonstrate, that it isn't just something, that, we should have outgrown this with G.I. Joes or whatever, is by being a little more thoughtful, in the way that we approach it, in the way that we discuss it, in the way that we handle it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. And I tell you, when that first round of the beatdown happened, I went through, my couple of drawers of games and just reference, like I really stopped buying games in the PS2 era. I mean, I'm consistently 2 generations behind in consoles. And that's just because I have no money, which is a really great way of limiting my game time. But even so, like, even though I had four-ish generations of consoles that I bought games for, and not like 6 or 7, I had a significant number of games in there. I'm sitting there looking at PlayStation games, and especially PlayStation era, because I just had way too many games by that point. I'm looking at them, it's like, I paid $40 for this game. I remember none of it, and I don't think I played past the first boss or the first level or whatever it was. This was a complete waste of money. And I've had to also kind of rethink as I'm not in college anymore and I don't have, 20 hours a day to play Final Fantasy. The completionist in me that needs to play 100 hours of a JRPG, and I really had to take stock of like, okay, is collecting these 100 items from around the world, is this going to be a good use of my time? And it may be. I might find it very relaxing. I recently played through Mario Lost levels, and I found that throwing myself at each individual level 40 to 50 times before I could beat the stupid thing was very relaxing to me. And so it was like, this is a fantastic use of my time. But but in a lot of contexts, I think that's a really good question to be asking. And so I wasn't able to join that actual beatdown, but it had a big impact on me. And I've the kind of the backlog beatdown group has spun off into a separate Facebook group that is called the Backlog Book Club, backlog with a hashtag in front of it, so hashtag Backlog Book Club. And we kind of regularly go through drafts. I'm usually not able to participate, but I watch every single time, and I think it's a lot of fun. And it's a lot. It's a fun way to go back instead of jumping out and dropping another $50 or searching through through whatever's in the used shelves. Instead of necessarily doing that all the time, to go back and say, hey, there were a lot of stuff that I wanted to play that I never actually got to. might this be a good use of my resources at this point?
Yeah, and I think that's sort of the intent. Yeah, that was really in a lot of ways what I hoped would happen through that people would sort of be inspired or encouraged to look at the stack of stuff that they have and don't play. And you pretty much tend to be exclusively, I'm going to sort of throw like, you can't see me, but I'm throwing air quotes around it, but a retro gamer.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
So I know that like you've referenced a lot of stuff from the SNES era and the PS1 era, which by the way, one of my favorite games of all time. It's usually in like my top 5. Top 10, depends on the day you catch me, but it's right. Valkyrie Profile for the PS1.
Which is one I have not played, but I will now buy, which is the exact opposite of what we're encouraging on this show.
I would, if you can find like a used copy on the cheap, I would definitely recommend checking it out. It was sort of one of those weird games that had like a limited run print and, a few years ago, my kid sister, and this, like, by years, I mean, like, it was like 10 or 15 years ago, I had a stack, like just a box full of video games and stuff, and I had gone through and I was getting rid of a bunch of them, and she said, I gave her the box of stuff to sell, and apparently I left that one in there, even though I did not intend to, and it was sort of heartbreaking because, I think it had a port released for the PSP or something, but it's just like, it's one of those games it's nearly impossible to get a copy of sometimes. But
gotcha.
if you can get a copy of that, I definitely recommend playing it. It's really interesting. You have to play it through like 8 times before it makes sense. But it's one of those weird ones. But I mean, and honestly, like if like you look at like the PS2 era, there's so many great games that sit on that console.
Yeah.
Specifically, I can think of, it was kind of like I'm going to, again, sort of throw air quotes around it, but it was a dark period of my life when I, actually, like, 100%ed Dragon Quest VIII, like, all the secret stuff. Like, I beat every optional and secret boss, and I had, like, over 200 hours in that game. It was, I wish I could go back and sort of change some of that stuff, but yeah, I mean, the goal really was to just sort of say like, and I think too, like, especially like, so just to sort of like, let people know, like right now the systems that I have a PS4 and a Wii U, and then, I actually just bought a Switch, which, it's sort of like, all my Christmas present, birthday, anniversary stuff. Yeah. It's like, I'm not getting any presents for a while.
Right.
And then, I've only recently gotten back into gaming. Like I was pretty hardcore into it a few years ago, sold all my stuff off and then, probably about 10, 15 years ago, sold most of my stuff off and then, sort of got back into it within the last, I'd say 5 or 6 years. Shortly around the time that I met my wife, I started playing games with more frequency again. Excuse me. So, but the goal, like, and especially when you look at a lot of the current services, like I look at like PS Plus and the gold membership stuff with 360 and the Xbox community. Like they're constantly offering free games with their membership programs. And so there's a lot of stuff that you just get. And I think, you and I, we sort of hinted at it and but one of the easiest ways to not create a backlog or to avoid creating a backlog rather is to not buy games. And, so in a lot of ways, this process has sort of helped me to slow down, avoid a lot of the hype train stuff. Like, I'm not saying that sometimes like I'm like, a game will come out and I'll be like, nope, I'm getting that.
Sure.
Like, I bought that new Metroid game the other month.
Yeah.
Like, I had some credit and a 3DS that I hadn't played in a while, and I was like, hey, I like Metroid, and so I have that, and I've been slowly sort of chipping away at that. But I mean, I think it was like early to mid-September, we actually started up another sort of backlog draft, and again, it's one of those things that like the first couple of weeks are really like exciting, and everybody's all talking about it, and then as you sort of pick your way through it, like you'll see like people sort of like will post the updates and stuff, and on this latest one, I ended up with 7 or 8 titles. They're all like shorter in the sense that none of the games for like a completionist style playthrough were more than like 10 to 15 hours.
Okay, yeah.
So, and it was just cleaning out a lot of like the smaller stuff. And there were actually some games that I had played years ago, had sort of forgotten about, and had them sitting on my console. And I was like, I keep meaning to get back into it. And like, right. So I recently replayed Bastion by Supergiant, and then Transistor by Supergiant. And I was just like, there's a reason like this studio gets my money consistently, because they just make fantastic games. So, like I said, sort of going back to it, and I feel like I'm rabbit trailing. I do that a lot, and I apologize.
No, it's good. It's good.
But the goal is to sort of like just help us to be more intentional about, and so some of it is not just, it's real easy to sort of like say, well, it's all about looking at how I'm managing my time, but it is also about like how I'm managing my money. And sometimes like, especially in this sort of gaming culture that we live in now, as far as like the hobby goes, there are these huge ad campaigns that are just meant to like, sort of like funnel this stuff straight into your brain. And, what I found is a lot of times, if I wait like a month, or so, if I still want the game at that point, like, maybe it's time to start looking around and just sort of seeing if I can find a deal on it or something like that. But
right.
I mean, I think what's been really cool about it too is like you've had guys like David Benjamin, from TRG, and then he's in the book club as well, was sort of this guy who just constantly posts, deals.
Oh yeah.
And, one of the sort of like the throwaway hashtag became, backlogs and finances. Keep your backlogs and finances in mind.
Right, exactly.
Like, hashtag backlogs and finances. But it's just like one of the things that I think is really just cool about that is that there is a lot of times when we are talking about like hype, like a new game that's coming out, or what, or some ad campaign or whatever. A lot of times you'll see that hashtag or even that idea sort of pop up in those threads. And that's always really encouraging to me, because I think, like I said, part of it is sort of raising up that culture where we're not just like aping the world and sort of being driven by like the next best thing, but we are being a little more intentional, and we are trying to be a little more thoughtful about, how we pursue this hobby.
Okay, we're going to break right there. Go into a couple commercials. Going to listen to a tune afterwards. This is a track from our Final Fantasy mixes. It is Chocobo Chocobo, and it's one of my favorite. It's actually one of my favorite tracks to perform. So hope you enjoy it.
He comes in the night, seemingly out of nowhere, a blur of yellow whose only mission is justice. His name is already legend, but the reality doesn't quite line up with the myth, and we're about to find out exactly how wrong we've been about him. He is the Yellow Canary. The Yellow Canary is a comedic thriller by Paul Lytle about a would-be superhero who may just be crazy enough to make a difference. The Yellow Canary by Paul Lytle, available from Amazon in print and on Kindle. Check for the link in the show notes.
Hey Drum, did you know that the Techno Funk Boy isn't just a group of podcast hosts that live inside a Super Nintendo?
Really?
That's right, we're also a band.
Tell me more.
We're a retro gaming inspired band that plays covers of classic video game themes, original game music, and other music in the style of classic games.
That sounds great.
Yeah, and you can find our first full-length album on iTunes, Amazon, and CD Baby. It's called the Final Fantasy Mixes, and it's an EDM tribute to some of Uematsu's best musical themes. Check the episode notes for links or go to Techno Funk Boy to learn more.
Techno Funk Boy sounds like the greatest band that has ever existed.
I programmed him to say that.
I'm back.
Okay, we are back. Hope you did enjoy that song. By the way, we are the show notes for this episode are at technofunkboy.com/12. That's the number 12, 1, 2. And you definitely want to check that out. We're going to have links to the Facebook group that Nate and I are discussing. If you do want to join us, you can find us there. And as well as links to be able to get that song, as well as all the other tracks off the Final Fantasy mixes. So, without further ado, let's jump right back into this one.
Where we're not just like aping the world and sort of being driven by like the next best thing, but we are being a little more intentional, and we are trying to be a little more thoughtful about how we pursue this hobby.
Right. Yeah, and I think that sort of thing hits the retro gamer just as hard, but in a weird kind of way, because I can listen to the Reformed Gamers all day, every day, and very little of it affects me, because I just, the good new PS4 game came out. I don't have a PS4. I'm not getting it. I can't afford a PS4, so I'm not going to afford the game either. I don't care. So it's fun to listen to the program, but what do I care? But when I start listening to a Retronauts, or Retro Warriors, and they're talking about, some Castlevania game that I don't have, and that's something that's right in my wheelhouse, and so I get excited about it. Between all my retro podcast and this, and I realize this one included, we're bringing up all these old games all the time, and just the general discussion about retro games and all the stuff centering around retro gaming, like the NES Classic, like the SNES Classic, are driving the prices of these games way high. And so it's fun to see, like, there's some stores, like I just visited a store the other day, that there's stores popping up that you can browse SNES games. But I'm also remembering, 10 years ago when I could go to a garage sale and get it for 50 cents, and now it's on sale for $50. And so I guess understanding that, like, this program is part of the conversation of retro gaming that's driving the excitement about retro gaming. And that also kind of spurs on the collector impulse in a lot of us. It's like, look, if you're not a collector, then don't act like one, I have to stop myself. I was just in that store the other day, and I had 3 games that were fairly reasonably priced for these days. All 3 I wanted to get, and I paused and I go, wait a minute. I still haven't finished Final Fantasy 12. Let me at least go finish that, And I have 12 other games behind it, but at least let me take a swing at the retro games that I already have before just adding to the pile of stuff I'm not getting to. And so I probably will at some point, pick up at least one of those games, but being in the group and listening, for, it's been, a couple of years now, listening to the Backlogs and Finances hashtag and, the beatdowns and stuff, kind of starting to get that in my head finally, that I don't need to get every single game this second, because I'm not going to play them, So,
dude, that is such an encouragement to me, because that really was sort of the hope, and it's not just for other people in the group, but I needed to, like, it sort of was that, and it's super cheesy and cliche, and I hate it, but that become the change you wish to see. A lot of it was like I needed to squash that same impulse in my own life, and so just even hearing that, like, that's had some positive impact on another guy's life, where he's like, man, I don't need this right now. That's fantastic, dude. And that's just like a total, praise God for that, man. Super. That's pretty rad.
Well, cool. Well, yeah. And thank you for the group and the constant reminders, because, I'm listening to more, retro gaming stuff than ever, just as part of my research for the show, and on more websites than ever, and in that world more than ever. And so I could totally burn my paycheck very, very easily. But it's So I mainly wanted to have you on because I know that impulse in the listeners to podcasts like this, and and like, I mean, if the people who want to be, like NES collectors, and y'all are out there, that's great. I don't have any problem with that as long as your bank account can sustain that. That's fine. But for those of you who aren't trying to like get a complete NES collection or SNES or whatever the case may be, take a look at the games you got, and the 1 hour advice, that's something I took to heart, and I think that's really good advice, is to take a swing at these games, see if you want to continue them, and if not, let's kick them off the backlog, sell them if you want to, whatever. But if so, build that, kind of build that into your playing time.
And yeah, that's at the end of the day, this is a hobby, and so we don't, we definitely don't want it to control or consume our lives. But I think it is that sort of just being much more intentional about the way we sort of engage this is sort of clutch. And that's sort of like the key takeaway for any of it for me. It's like just to slow down and think about it just a little bit more, Right,
exactly. Yeah.
So, thanks, thanks for inviting me on and having me, let me sort of jabber on about this. It really is. It's one of those things, like there are a few topics that I can sort of run down the rabbit hole on, and this is one of my favorites, just in the sense that, like, I think, and again, sort of, going back to what I said before, it's like there is such a push in the evangelical and some of the reformed communities against gaming and adults and men gaming and things like that. And, I think it's really easy to be, to sort of be on the other side of that and say, well, what about football or movies or books or whatever? And, sort of like kick up that knee-jerk sort of defense.
Right.
But I think like the more mature response is to just sort of step back, think about the legitimate criticisms, but also to have, spend a little bit of time and sort of, and I think even sort of being responsible in the way that we sort of engage the habit, where it's just sort of saying, if you don't have the money, don't buy it. It's that simple. Or, if you do have like 6 games waiting at home, take 30 seconds to say, well, if I buy this, what's the likelihood that I'm going to play it right away? And if I do play it right away, how's that going to impact these other 6 or 7 games that I've been meaning to get around to? And, I think those are just worthwhile questions that, as mindful, thoughtful consumers, we can afford, we should be asking in regards to our hobby. So.
Yeah, exactly. That's fantastic. All right. Well, the Facebook group is the hashtag Backlog Book Club, and it's not it's not a massive group, but we have some good discussion in there, and so if you would like to join us for the next beat down, just find us on Facebook and request entry. Nate will probably let you in. I can't let you in, but he will.
We can change that. We can change that. We can always use more gatekeepers. No, yeah, we don't. I think it just as long as it's not. It's the sort of don't tell me you have Xbox codes sort of response, where it's like, just understand that it's a very niche group,
Right.
It's dedicated towards sort of just being more conscientious, and I mean we still have some of the same conversations where we're excited about stuff and we talk about it, but for the most part it is pretty consistently about just addressing the stuff in our backlogs, and it sort of revolves around that. So, not super dynamic,
right.
Conversations, but I think they are fairly robust, and it's been a really enjoyable community to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely. So. I totally agree. So, well, thank you again for coming on. I'm really happy that we're kind of tackling this topic, and it is going to be one that we keep coming back to, because I like helping people be excited about games, but I also want to put the caution in there that it's great being excited about games. Gaming is a blast, and it's a really good hobby for those who like it. But it is a hobby for 99.9% of us, and so it needs to stay in the context of a hobby, and not kind of just take over your life. And so.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks so much for, having me on. And like I said, before, let me sort of jabber on about it. So it was really, I really had a good time, man. So.
All right. Well, thanks again. All right. Well, that's it. So let me know what you think. Again, on the show notes page at technofunkboy.com/12, that's the number 12, you will find the notes for the show as well as links to that Facebook group if you are interested in joining us. I tell you what, I have not been able to join one of the drafts because, just, time constraints. For a guy who runs a retro gaming themed podcast, I play very little video games right now, just not because I don't want to, but because of time constraints. And so it's not something that I have been able to sit down and say, okay, yeah, this is something that I can play with, for a period of time. So, but I always have fun watching them being played. I have fun, watching some of the guys play old games, especially if they're games I like a lot. One of the people in the group, played through, Mega Man 2 and 3, I think it was. And that really actually got me thinking back and about how much I like those games, but I was never able to beat them. And so I went back to Mega Man 2 using, and quick correction, I was able to beat them, with the, Game Genie, which is totally not beating it at all. So I went back to Mega Man 2, on an emulator with save states and, hammered away at it that way, knowing that I could master it without save states, but again, the time constraint, I wanted to if I got past the part, I wanted to stay past that part just so I could get through it faster. And I know it's cheating. It's cheating a little bit, but, it is less cheating than Game Genie. Let's just say it that way. But it did inspire me to go back to that. And that game has literally been on my backlog since basically it came out, because I put a lot of time into it. I had a lot of fun with it, but I wasn't able to beat it, not by myself. And, I had the first 4 Mega Man games, and I wasn't able to beat any of them. I really loved platformers, and I don't know, I'm so much better at them now, and I'm really not sure why I had such problems with them, considering how much time I put into those games, but I did. And so, I was able to beat Super Mario 1 and Super Mario 3 and Mario World and that sort of thing, but like the Mega Mans were always just a little bit too hard. And then on, the other side of things, I was very good at Contra for some reason. And, it still cracks me up when people say that's a hard game, because I never thought of it as a hard game, whereas I couldn't beat most other games. I don't know. There's something wrong with me as a kid. But anyways, I digress. For someone like me, it is a good reminder that I have a drawer full of old cartridges, and I have a few games that I got on like Virtual Console on the Wii, or even have one on Amazon Fire that I haven't beat. That one's Final Fantasy 3, if you're wondering. And so it's a good reminder that I don't necessarily need to run out and buy new games. So especially in times when, money might be tight or something like that, just to keep in mind what do we have, and would, weigh that against whatever it is you want to purchase. And that has been, for the last, I guess, year or two that I've been in the group, that's been a very good reminder for me. And especially as I've started to listen to a lot more gaming podcasts, that, the temptation there is great. When Retronauts talk about a really rare game that I never played, but I see it, I see it somewhere and I can get it. But, anyways, I do hope that you enjoyed that. Next week, we are going to be doing another music-heavy episode. Steven has already not approved of the topic and says he thinks it's going to be dumb. And so we're going to see how things go with him next week. Otherwise, I really do appreciate you listening. Please be sure and check out our show notes, technofunkboy.com/12/12. You can sign up for our newsletter there as well. The newsletter ensures that you are going to be up to date on all of our free music, all of the other things that we come across, or we try to make available for our listeners. It's kind of the place that we try to show our appreciation by, if we're able to, funneling some free stuff or good deals your way. So, thank you again for listening, and we will catch you next week.
The Retro Zoo Super Show is brought to you by the Techno Funk Boy. Follow us on Twitter at Techno Funk Boy, on Facebook at the Techno Funk Boy, and sign up for our email list at technofunkboy.com. Also look for us on Spotify, iTunes, and Amazon for music. If you are so inclined, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on your favorite podcast catcher. If you are not so inclined, you are obviously some sort of villain trying to conquer the world. Unowned music and gameplay clips are used for educational and critical purposes. Thank you for listening. Keep gaming. And once you have responsibilities that need to be done at this time, then you can game later.